And through the drifts the snowy cliffs did send a dismal sheen, nor shapes of men nor beasts we ken, the ice was all between.
Stratters. Magic the Gathering Arena Shuffler might be broken. Just might. In real life, shuffling isn't random, it's semi-random. What happens is there's only a finite number of movements of riffling and shuffling that moves one card to a different spot. In real life, when you draw cards, it's not completely random, it's just random enough that everyone forgets where all the positions of the cards are, and we call it good. Online, cards can be shuffled truly randomly. It makes for pretty funny games. It's like 1 in a 10,000 chance you just draw 10 or 15 lands in a row. Now this would never happen in a real game of Magic the Gathering because if you just do, between 5 and 15 shuffles and riffles, that is not enough to have a truly random pile of cards turn into a straight line of 10 to 15 lands. It's just not. So here we have a game of Saffron Olive playing with Rubble Reading. There's 2 Rubble Readings in the bottom of his deck. There's a Rubble Reading in his hand, and he just draws a 4th Rubble Reading. And he's in agony. That's pretty funny. I've had 4 of a kinds before. There was a game, Gen Con, I had 4 Studded Growths in my opening hand, and I kept it. And my opponent was playing Green Black the Rock with Spirit Mongers. It's extended, and he made me discard a Studded Growth. He destroyed a land, one of my forests. He destroyed one of my elves, like a Landor Elf or Priest of Titania. And the remaining Studded Growths, 2 of them he might have been able to get a Pernicious Deed down, and, well, he just got hit by Plow Unders and Studded Growths until he had no cards in his hand and he just died. It was a pretty funny game. It's pretty weird that Saffron Olive got a 4 of a kind in Magic the Gathering. It does seem like there was some kind of clumping in Magic the Gathering, either getting too many non-lands in a row and too many lands in a row. Saffron Olive says, in this exact video, it does seem that there's something strange with the Shuffler. What's unique about MTGA Shuffler as opposed to Magic the Gathering Online Shuffler Magic the Gathering Online Shuffler is truly random, all 60 cards. And the MTGA Shuffler, what's different is the first 7 cards you get your opening hand isn't really a random opening hand. I've been told you get 2 opening hands, and the Magic the Gathering Arena computer decides which one is typical for your hand. So if you have a deck with a high number of lands, and you get a hand with, say, 1 mana and 4 mana, it will give you the hand with 4 mana in your opening hand because that's typical for your deck. You put half of your deck as lands. Or if you're playing, say, Burn, and you have 16 lands in your deck, and you have a hand with 1 hand, another hand with 4 lands, the shuffler will pick the hand with 1 land in it, and it will give you that as your opening hand. So it's a pseudo-friendly mulligan, and the question is the remaining 53 cards randomized? Are there clumping issues in Magic the Gathering that's just not typical of what's truly random in real life? Is Magic the Gathering Arena playing games? The hypothesis is Magic the Gathering Arena is not doing its work, due diligence. It's not telling the truth that the deck's random. It's actually stacking the deck. Let's go back to this comment here. It's pretty cool. Someone in the chat states there's a real bug in shuffling by Tanos. There's been too many instances I've seen personally and on MTG streams that indicate the shuffler has some issue. Without doing a Nova based on a ton of keeping track, though, it's only a hunch. Saffron Olive agrees. There is kind of a hunch in the air that the rest isn't truly random. Well, Tanos, Saffron Olive, you get your wish. Because here's the study. So first off, here's the study on Reddit. Give me a second to thank Desolator Magic. MTGA Arena Shuffler proven to be rigged / malfunctional in a large test. Just ignore the opinionated. I want to go through this more as a scientist than as an opinionated poll. There will be some opinions, But I'm not going to just say right out that it has to be rigged. I want to go through the whole thing first and see if this is really a non-random game. Back in January, I decided to do something about the lack of data everyone keeps talking about regarding shuffler complaints. I've done so with data from over 1 million games. Literally, please check my work. This is going to be a lengthy post, so I'll give an outline first. You can jump to specific sections if you want to. Debunking the evil shuffler. In a scientific study, you need to go to hypothesis. So his hypothesis is that Magic the Gathering Arena is non-random. The statement that Wizards of the Coast saying that their shuffler is random is incorrect. It's not a very scientific hypothesis. Usually if you say hypothesis, you just say, I want to show, within a 99% confidence, 97% confidence intervals, and you have bar graphs, and then you have those little lines above and below the bar graphs which show standard deviations, and then you state at the conclusion, we proved or failed to prove that this is truly random or not. He doesn't do this. His reasons is he just wants to show whether you get mana screwed or mana flooded more often than usual. Mana screwed, mana flooded is an opinion that changes person to person. So he goes fishing. I don't like fishing in science. Fishing is basically just grabbing all the numbers you can and then looking at them and saying, what's wrong with the numbers or what's right with the numbers. In science, you're really supposed to say, these are the numbers we're expecting to get in this range before the study ever even starts. You can just do a ton of math before the study even starts. And then you do this study. So this isn't scientific. Still, I want to go over this because this seems like the most amount of work anyone's ever done regarding randomness. So he finds a tracker. This is his methodology of doing this. He finds someone. He doesn't want. If someone who does a computer program that lets you track magic cards being drawn. The first person said no. The second person says yes, but he doesn't want to do the study himself. Manuel Etchegary. I hope I get this right. His opinion was the shuffler is truly random, and that's the problem. But it was willing to accept if I did all the work. Doing it myself was all I had in mind anyway. So I set around writing some code. So he wrote some code. I linked it from Reddit to github.com. And he keeps track of how cards are drawn and the number of cards in the deck. And I've taken just a few classes in coding. I'm not able to double check this work though. Seems like a lot of lines of code. Seems like 2,528 lines of code. Anyway. He keeps track of how cards are drawn. And it doesn't matter how cards are drawn. It's either, if a card is you cast with Opt, you get to look at the top card of your library. Say it's a land. If it's a land on the bottom of your library, it counts as the land being drawn, quote unquote. If a card is exiled, so exiles the top two cards of your library, you may cast them next turn. Those are cards that are drawn. It doesn't matter. If it's explored, and you look at the top card of your library and it's a land, that counts too. Any method possible that the card is drawn. So he breaks the game like so. So you're supposed to have a 60-card deck in Magic the Gathering. You can have at least 60 cards in constructed format. So people play with 61. He subtracts 7 cards from that because we already know the first 7 cards aren't truly random. So we're just looking at the cards that are stated are truly random. So for a 60-card deck, there should be 53 cards left in your library after you draw your opening 7. 61, 62, 63, 64, 65 card decks are placed in separate columns. Unfortunately, the number of people who play decks that are larger than 62 cards are quite rare, so it's not really possible to examine whether Mana Flood or Mana Screw is possible in 65 card decks, which is this column here. So we'll look at lands in library. I was told the 20-20-20 rule back in Revised. You have 20 lands, 20 creatures, 20 spells. And that works very well for the archetypes of the time, which was mainly like White Weenie. So lands left in library should be, for say White Weenie, you should expect 2 lands in your opening hand, leaving you with 18 remaining cards in your 53. So this is like a very high number of games being played Magic the Gathering. The green is what's spot on. The red is what he just calls as the problem areas. And he doesn't really, like I said, doesn't really say exactly what the problem area interval is. It's just what looks obviously wrong. It's not very scientific, but it does show that in certain combinations of cards, the shuffler is spot on. It looks truly random in 61 card decks that the shuffler is doing well. And then in 60 card decks, he states that there's something wrong in certain combinations of lands. Say, like a burn deck, like I said, that had 16 lands in the entire deck. If you drew one land, and this happened in 9,439 games, it seems to be mana clumping, mana screw issues in that burn deck, but not if you were playing white weenie kind of decks with 19 or 20 lands remaining. Quite a statement. Here in this other column, 33 to 38 cards remaining, this is for draft decks. Draft requires you to have 40 cards or more in the deck. You can also have 5 of the same card in your deck. It's a slightly different rules than constructed. So if you had a 40 card deck and you had 7 cards in your opening hand, you'd have 33 cards remaining. That is the majority of the decks. Some people say you can't have 41. Frank Lepore has played with 42, I've noticed. And then people who play with 43, 44, 45 are just exceedingly rare. The point of not playing decks that are 45 cards in draft is that you're getting a lower chance of getting the best card in your deck, which is why you want to keep your deck as small as possible, because there's only a few rares in the deck, and the rares are usually your bombs, and your bombs usually win the game. Therefore, you don't want to stick too many commons in your deck if there's just not enough rares in the first place. And he notices that in 40 card decks, you should have about 17 lands in your deck. You can play 18 to 19 or 18 in control. I don't recommend it. But 17 lands is normal for a deck, and so most people will draw 7 cards, getting, say, between 2 and 5 lands in their opening hands. And that's not random, he states. But he says if you play a 41 card deck and you draw your opening hand, your remaining 34 cards are truly random. That's an interesting statement. He doesn't have many graphs. He shows a couple of bar graphs. For example, looking at a 21 lands in your 53, this is constructed. 104,581 games were played with a 60 card deck with 21 lands remaining. And he states that being mana screwed which is this 0 bar, and then mana flooded, which is this 5 bar, doesn't happen very often, because it's just like flipping a coin. Getting heads 5 times in a row is just unlikely. Getting tails 5 times in a row is also unlikely. That's why these bars are so small. What's interesting is there is a higher actual number of mana floods than what he expected, and the hypergeometric distribution of this is there's a 13% chance your mana flood will be this bad. So let me give you a crash course in hypergeometric distributions, because he uses the hypergeometric distributions for his bar graphs as opposed to normal distributions. The hypergeometric distributions are used all the time in Magic the Gathering. Players use it every single day to decide how to design a deck, how many lands deserve to be in the deck. For example, here is a population of 46. It's a deck with 46 cards. The successes are 19 of the 46 cards are successes, 19 lands. Sample size is 4. So say you have a spell that lets you draw 4 cards. So success is 0. You draw 0 cards, which means you're mana screwed. The probability of this function, P of X, is 0.1075. 100% probability is a P of X of 1. A 0% probability is a P of X of 0. So basically, if you have to draw 4 spell with 19 lands in your library out of 46, you'll get mana screwed 1 out of 9 times. That's what hypergeometric is. And it's pretty funny because every single time. So here's another one. I'm just minding my own YouTube comments. A hypergeometric distribution, population of 60 cards. The probability that Travis could throw 43 cards. So say you have a Valakut the Molten Pinnacle deck, and you don't have Scape Shifts. So Travis dredges his way to find Valakut the Molten Pinnacles with Life of the Loams, and then Life of the Loams his Valakut the Molten Pinnacles to kill the opponent. Well, you can go through 43 cards in your Valakut the Molten Pinnacle deck with 4 Valakuts, and you can never get a Valakut 0.488% of the time, so about 1 in 200 games. The deck just does not work at all. And like I said, I've played a deck at Gen Con with 4 Studded Growths, and I just get a 4 of a kind. I figured about 1 in 1,000 times. I guess maybe it could be 1 out of 500 times. I'm just rounding nearest whatever. Yeah, these 1 in 1,000 chances does happen in Magic the Gathering. So the question is the differences that he gets from random typical? And in a world where you can get a 4 of a kind, in a world where you can get 0 Valakuts and 43 cards. So let's look at the meat of the data. For a deck with 53 cards remaining in the library, 21 lands remaining in the library, this is a typical Midrange E deck. Typically you'd have 24 lands in a 60 card deck, and you would expect to draw 3 lands of those 24 in your 7 cards. That would be a typical game of Magic the Gathering. You would get 37,959 of those 104,000 games would have an expected number of lands drawn. 2 out of 5 cards in your top of your deck were lands. What happened was 38,012 games were a typical game of Magic the Gathering. It's very close. Luck being this bad is 73% of the time. He doesn't say, if this is good or bad or not. He just uses his eyeball to figure out whether this is possible or not. For being mana screwed, that's 0 lands in the top 5 cards. At 53 cards in your library, he expected 7,338 games out of 104,581 to be mana screwed games. He got 7,285. That's not right on the money, but it's close. And he expected, for Mana Flood, he expected 741 games out of 104,581 to be mana flooded, and he got 782 games where he was mana flooded. So it appears that the mid-rangey deck does not have a problem being with randomness and Magic the Gathering Arena. Moving on to another graph. This is a typical draft deck in Magic the Gathering Arena. Usually you'd expect 17 lands and a 40 card deck. You draw your opening 7, giving you 33 cards in your deck and 14 lands remaining in your library, expecting you to draw 3 out of the lands out of the 17 in your deck is a typical game of Magic the Gathering. He says that a typical game happened 15,603 times. He expected a typical game of Magic the Gathering to happen 15,621 times. You expect 2 lands in the top 5 in your library. So that seems like round and runny, but look at Mana Screw and Mana Flood. He expected 2,059 games to be Mana Screwed. He was Mana Screwed 2,464 times in the games he studied. That's about 20%. If you see this little red line, I don't know if you can see it, but it's 1 pixel wide. About 20% from the top to the bottom of this white square here. This red line is what he expected, and then he got this distance between the red line and the top of the bar is what he actually got. Looking at Mana Flood, he expected to be Mana Flooded 354 times. He was Mana Flooded 279 times. And there's a 0.003% chance of that happening. So what he's stating, I guess, is Magic the Gathering Arena deliberately reduces your Mana Flood and increases your Mana Screw if you're playing this specific type of deck. Alright, so let's go to the conclusions. He doesn't have any conclusions about drawing multiple copies of the same card, what happened to Saffron Olive. But regarding lands, the following factors seem to be at work. Small, limited-sized decks have a strong trend of drawing few lands, both in the opening hand and after. that small means 40 card decks get mana screwed. 2. Drawing and keeping an opening hand with fewer or many lands has a weaker but still noticeable trend to draw fewer or more lands respectively from the library after play begins. Meaning that there is a mana screw and mana flood problem in Magic the Gathering Arena. 3. Decks with fewer or many lands have a tendency to draw more or fewer lands respectively in the opening hand than they should. There's a sweet spot at 22 or 23 lands and 60 cards. It gets close to what it should, and moving away from that does move the distribution in the correct direction. Decks with fewer lands draw fewer lands, but the difference isn't as big as it should be. Yeah, there's a mana flood issue. 4. Taking a mulligan fixes all issues. This is the one that's disturbing the most. Yeah, what do you think about this report? It's reddit.com/r/magicarena/comments/b21u3n/I analyzed shuffling in a million games. All with underscores between the words. Thanks for watching.